Hey everyone, happy Monday. Awesome, let's get started. So first up, thank you so much, Yorick, for helping out. We've got an interesting one going on at the moment. I'm hoping this is going to be the only one, but we may not be, in that we're generating RCs for to help out with a specific customer problem. And so it's not one of our documented processes. So it's been a little bit interesting in the last few days. So yeah, thanks so much, Yorick, for help unblocking us on that one earlier. Cool. Next announcement, engagement survey. So just in case you haven't seen it, you should have an email somewhere. It's coming from Culture Amp. So if you haven't been through that already, please do take some time to complete that. I've spoken to a few of you about this already. Like, Culture Amp holds the raw data. There's no like the raw data doesn't come back to GitLab in any way. It gets cut into like specific reports that feed the data back. So it is anonymous in that sense. Comments are super useful in terms of giving a bit of context on why you have certain opinions on things, but comments are also the bit that usually make it a lot less anonymous. So if you are adding comments, like, try and make them as generic as you can to help people remain that sort of anonymous data. But yeah, please do be honest. Like, I know there's probably some opinions on how things have been in the past or what's happened after these surveys in the past, but like, you know, it is useful to share those things as well. So cool. And Alessio,
when is the deadline, Amy?
December the 15th.
Thanks so much. Super important bit of information. And I've linked in the Slack thread there that has links off to the issue and things like that. So if you have feedback on the general thing, then it's being gathered as well. I don't actually know either what happens next. I should find out, but assume there'll be results will be shared. And what I also like to do is we'll talk through this together as a team at some point once we have results, and see if there's anything we can do within our team to kind of improve on areas that haven't performed so well. Awesome. So discussion. So unscheduled work. So I was chatting to Marion earlier, and we were talking about the fact that there's always going to be kind of unexpected things that come in. But what is probably useful for me to keep track of is what's the unexpected stuff that came in that actually we should have been able to predict in some way. So it's not just always unexpected. So I was thinking, just as a super lightweight way of doing this, initially I'll just stick the unscheduled label, which I have to admit I haven't found, but I'll find an unscheduled label which I could put on things that we didn't consider we were going to be working on, but which are important enough that we need to do them. So currently those sort of things are some of the recent discussions we've been having about Gitly and how we can get more visibility to pipeline failures there. And also things like renaming of the master branch and stuff like that that's going to generate work for us that we perhaps, like, the beginning of quarter didn't realize. So I suppose my first question is, does that sound like a vaguely useful thing? Like, I'm not necessarily expecting any of you to do too much with this right now, but if you want to, then you're certainly welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
So are we talking about this kind of some kind of interrupt driven work? So we are doing something else and then we have some kind of an emergency and then we want to track that this happened? Or is more about something slammed in our face, but is not so urgent to be done right here, right now? So we just label unscheduled and then we know that well, I don't know what we know about this, but kind of we didn't consider in our quarter planning, but we still want to address this in, I don't know, weeks, for instance.
It's a great question. In terms of the interrupt driven stuff, are you, I mean, I know we have like corrective actions, like are there other interrupt driven things that you're thinking of?
Well, it may also be some kind, maybe an incident or an security issues. I mean, it's, I don't know, right? So maybe during regular development, we break something and then someone has to stop and fix some pipeline error or things like that. Yeah, or maybe we have an API change it happened in the past that we had API changes in the product, and then some of our integration no longer works and someone had to stop and fix those things.
Yeah. So I think the API change would be one of these, because I think that's a great one where with some kind of processy change, we could have like been aware that that was coming up. Probably the pipeline breaking or incidents, perhaps a little bit less so. I don't think it's like we definitely shouldn't label them, but I think they're probably they will always exist to some degree. So I think there's probably a little bit less learning that we can do from those things. I think if it feels useful, like feel free to either add it or let me know so we can add it. But I think probably the ones I'm thinking more of are types of work that would have been possible for us to have known about in some form so that we could have got a little bit further ahead of. So like, I'm thinking kind of like somebody did a project that impacted us, or we had a thing for some reason that had a time limit on it that we forgot about and didn't prioritize, or something along those lines. Cool. Jarv, do you want to verbalize that before I jump into this other bit?
Yeah, I'm also having a little difficulty kind of wrapping my head around what type of issues would require this label, because I'm used to scheduled work in the context of sprint planning. Maybe work that's not tied to an OKR, interrupt-driven work that comes from outside the team. Those are two things I can think of that we could use it for. But there's also the category of work where we schedule and we plan and schedule like an epic, and then we have a bunch of tasks, and then there are things that we didn't think about that we need to add later. And in the context of sprint planning, this can be unscheduled work because it's like something that you didn't plan for the sprint, but you had to do it. But I don't think that applies here, right?
That's right. Yeah, no, I'm thinking like I'm gonna keep it kind of loose so we can kind of see how it goes. But I am thinking along the lines, like I think anything that's to do with an OKR, I think that's the problem is scheduled. I think it's more like a problem that could have been scheduled, hasn't been scheduled. It's probably more how I'm thinking about it. So like, I'd say like this renaming of the master branch, like we could have scheduled that. Like if we'd have known that was coming up this quarter, we could have scheduled that work. As it is, we haven't, and now we're kind of, we're at danger of becoming a bit behind on that task. So I'm not going to ask you to do anything with this labeling. I will add these in, and I'm going to say initially I'm going to use them really so that I can review how I've been thinking about prioritizing things and see if we can change that or how we can increase visibility from other teams. But the question I did have for you is, in terms of our current scheduled things, I'm thinking we obviously have OKRs and all our work related to OKRs. Is there anything else that you're considering to be scheduled work at the moment that we should like treat as scheduled? Is there anything else?
Maybe release related work and release work that you do as a release manager to both like work on the release and also improve the release process. Because that's sort of, I feel like that's sort of scheduled, is kind of baked into being a release manager, is that you're working on that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. Let's treat all of that stuff as scheduled work as well. Yeah.
There is also the architecture workflow stuff that it may happen from time to time. So for instance, right now I'm working on the uploads and object storage blueprint. So it's something that wasn't really in the planning when we started the quarter, but yeah, it's still something that we're doing.
Yes. Okay, that's a great example as well, actually. Yeah, of something that almost becomes scheduled. We don't just fall into that so much. It's like a choice. So yeah, that's another great example. Myra, how do you want to consider the rest of the security process improvements?
That is a good question. I was seeing some updates about removing the build label because it is not currently prioritized. So I'm not sure if if it is not scheduled, I guess it will be to non-scheduled. I am kind of confused there.
Is there anything in like that we're aware of around the security process that you would want us to consider as scheduled? Like, is there anything that we really should do this quarter?
Probably it would be a good idea to start automating the backporting process, but that is like a lot of work, and I'm not sure if we have the bandwidth with the OKRs.
Is it something which, so I am assuming that, so we have a security release scheduled for next week, for Monday. So we won't have it for that. The next one will be in January, I assume, because of the production changelog over the holiday period. So is it something we could push out to the next quarter?
Yes, definitely.
Cool. Okay, let's consider it unscheduled in that case. Like there may be cases where we need to react and do some process changes. But I think it does feel like we have a lot of stuff in progress right now. So it'd be good to limit that where we can. Cool. Okay. Great. Okay. Well, I'll start work on this. I expect to see a few extra labels, but don't feel you have to do anything. And what I will do is try and work out some patterns that we can discuss and come up with a plan around. Cool. So the other thing I wanted to talk about really was metrics around deployments. So there's two proposals that are open. Both of these are kind of please get involved and share stuff, but I think they're kind of linked to a slightly bigger thing. So one of them, the simple one, is the first one, which is the proposal for a deployment SLO. We're at the state of discussing what deployment really means. And then once we work that out, we can work out what a sensible number is. Now, the background for this one is that MTTP has in it some elements that are outside of delivery's control around, for example, like how long do QA tests run and things like that. So this would be to try and separate those a little bit. And so we would have MTTP as our overall KPI. And within that, we would have a split between kind of things that we can directly control and things that we can't directly control, which we can help work with others to change. And then the second one is around mean time between deployment failure, which is a sort of breakout of mean time between failure, which Scalability are working on at the moment. And the idea behind this would be to try and get us something which we could use as a kind of counterbalance to MTTP, so that we'd know, like, if we start deploying too fast, we would see this measure increase. And we could sort of use that to say, okay, we're taking too much risk here. However, both of them are in very, very early stages. So actually stepping back a little bit, what I thought might be more interesting is to think about what's a useful thing for us to be tracking in terms of like an MTTP style thing. What information would be useful for us to have?
I think it would be useful to have the time it takes for things to build, the time it takes for things to deploy, the time it takes for QA to run, all the things that are listed in that issue already.
Cool. So like the actual kind of like each of the phases is kind of the goal.
Yeah. I'm curious, I don't know if we should touch on this now, but like maybe we want to track how long it takes for us to get a feature out, not a feature, a release out along with our tracking auto deployments. I don't know if that's helpful at all because I know we scheduled that and everything, but I'm just thinking out loud.
There is also another thing that I would like to track, which is not really related to what we are doing, but can help us in other conversation along the line in the idea of batching background migrations. So if we could track mean time between migration and mean time between background migration so that we know how long it takes. So every X deployment, we have one migration, or maybe we just have one background migration a month, something like that, so that we can understand the frequency of migration and background migration. So not just background, just post-deployment migration as a whole. I don't care if it's just background or just a post-deployment migration.
Similar to that point, I made a comment on that issue already where it'd be interesting to have tracking for every component of our deploy, because things like Gitly is the perfect example of where if there's no change in the Gitly version, we don't deploy to those nodes. We just skip right over that. So if we take an entire MTTP and it includes Gitly, one day it's going to be like, hey, it took us 5 minutes to deploy. Where if we add the Gitly fleet because there's a version change, it will be like, oh, it took 3 hours to deploy. So our MTP is going to do a big sawtooth over the course of time, and that's going to be kind of awkward to figure out how to balance and measure.
But we will lose track of this as soon as we migrate to Kubernetes, because we have one chart and do the magic.
I don't see us migrating Gitly to Kubernetes anytime soon.
Yes, but again, you can still have Gitly as things that you track separately, but then web, front end, all the other things that right now can be tracked as an individual thing, then will be just part of
That's true. That's very accurate.
Yeah.
And are you thinking around these metrics that the most useful stuff is for us to be identifying like where to focus on? Is that how everybody's thinking of this stuff?
Well, the way I see this type of metrics is more where we can socialize with development teams when there is a kind of struggle in the way that software, so that component of GitLab interacts with the deployment. So it's not, because it really depends, right? So maybe there's some optimization that we can do in our deployment pipeline, but oftentimes could be that is actually the way the software is designed that doesn't allow for a faster deployment. So both cases.
Yeah, that's a super good point. Cool. Okay, great. I think I will open up an issue which has the kind of general overarching concept, because it's kind of aware that both the deployment SLO and the mean time between deployment failure are two specific related things that kind of tie into something much bigger, which is also tied into MTTP. So I'll open up a discussion issue just to gather, try and link those together. And also if you want to kind of debate ideas or share thoughts and things like that, then go ahead on that as well. Awesome. Was there anything else anyone wants to say around metrics? Awesome. I'll stop the recording.